From the shadows where the whispers grow, through the night where the warriors flow, feel the power in the tales untold. Lord Ninja Choke takes a strong hold.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 16 of the Lord Ninja Choke MMA Picks podcast. Today we are going to be breaking down UFC Shanghai, which is headlined by Walker versus Zhang. And it's, not the most exciting card, so we do appreciate everyone tuning in for what is going to be a 3 a.m. Eastern time for the majority of the US. So it's going to be a sketchy one, but we're going to get through it. We'll break down a fight each, as we always do. But prior to that, we're going to take a look through our results for UFC 319. So we had 5 picks across the podcast. We went with Dricus du Plessis, which unfortunately ended up in a loss. Lerone Murphy was a win. MVP was a win. GM3 was a loss. And Edson Barbosa was a loss. So obviously adding a little bit more red to the bottom of the table there, but overall still trending in the right direction, I think. So yeah, it was a tricky event for me personally. I ended up with a very slight loss of around. Actually, I realised that the graphic on the video is not quite accurate, so there should be a small amount more there. So it's like a minus 0.4 unit loss, I think it was. I had a max bet on Michael Venom Page, which ended up being, in my opinion, I think a value bet. I think minus 160 was a very good price for Michael Venom Page. The third round was relatively sketchy, but I wasn't that worried. But the issue with my card really was that I went early with a lot of my prop bets, with a lot of my underdog bets, which resulted in me being just overexposed on GM3 and Jessica Andrade. Having 2 units on both of those meant that even if I did have a max bet on MVP, the amount that I would make off of that wouldn't be enough to play catch up. So even though I won a max bet, I was still in the red by that point. Losses on DDP, wins on Carlos Prates. Yeah, it was a card of highs and lows, I guess, but overall kind of breaking even, I assume. So yeah, not really one that I'm that worried about.
Yeah, so I lost a lot of money on DDP. It's basically the story of my night, and didn't expect the gulf in class in the wrestling to be that large. And I knew it was going to be a long night when you see your fighter that you're backing in a crucifix position within, 2 minutes. I actually have never seen someone survive 4 crucifixes before, so that was something novel. No, I think Hamzat was dominant, and I think I was overexposed to DDP. And if I had just stuck with the 5 units that I initially had played and not doubled down on that and went for the full 10, it would have been okay, because I had quite good reads on a lot of the fights. I actually bet Godinez, Murphy, closer. I had quite a large bet on Murphy, 2 units on closer, and yeah, I think it could have been a sort of a neutral or slightly positive night. If I hadn't bet on DDP at all, I would definitely have been up. So yeah, lesson learned about overcommitting in the wrong spots. How about you, Josh?
A reasonably decent event, apart from the pretty horrid picks. 2 of 3 locks have landed, so that kind of makes it a bit easier on the eyes. My prediction accuracy took a hit though, so minus 0.5% to the total accuracy for this year. But on the plus side, my parlay hit, which is great. I mean, I think in total I'm up about 4 units from this event alone. That's including all my single bet recommendations, all of my alt bets, which, as you can see, Elliot did make that happen. But I'm a bit sad about the whole DDP losing thing. Like I was so dismayed and so shattered when I saw DDP get controlled for 20 minutes plus. It was a bit of a underwhelming performance from him, and even more underwhelming from Chimaev, who we thought would probably run through DDP early on, but no, it was just a really boring 25-minute fight. So yeah, up on the money, but down on the predictions. So that's one of those weeks for me.
I think it's really interesting when you look at the discussion of sports betting as a concept. I mean, when you're looking at things in terms of units and money, we're kind of looking at trying to make investments and putting our money in the right spots. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is sometimes fun, and sometimes you get caught up in the circus. So when you do over invest on a bet for a big fight like Chimaev versus DDP, I think it's fine. Like, I wouldn't blame yourself for that. I did the same thing with Manon Fiorot earlier in the year because I do love women's MMA. So we've both got war wounds of overexerting on like a 10-unit bet and it not panning out. So we have that shared trauma. But anyway, we move on to next week's card, which is a real dip in quality. So we have UFC Fight Night Shanghai, which is headlined by Johnny Walker and Mingyang Zhang. Does anyone have any thoughts on this card? Looking at it from top to bottom here, I know how I feel, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, it's pretty god awful. I mean, I feel like they only have this Shanghai card because the Road to UFC is again this week, so it's like a connected event somewhat. There are some decent fights there. I mean, Ortega Sterling is one of the highlights for me. But outside of that, I mean, Kyle Dorcas is making his comeback against Michel Pereira, which is going to be god awful for Kyle because I don't really think Kyle is on any level at the UFC. Like, he is just not a UFC level fighter. But other than that, all of these fights are pretty tepid.
Yeah, it's pretty lackluster. There's nothing super exciting here. I guess the heavyweight matchup, which has some implications in that division, so I guess that's probably most relevant. I can't really see the main event as being that relevant to the division. I guess the co-main is of relevance. But yeah, looking at the first three fights of the night, I literally barely remember who any of those are. Maybe Weston Wilson, I think for the wrong reasons. As you said, the return of Carl Dorcas, that should be interesting. Michel Pereira's looked very off recently, so it's a layup for him. He should win that. Yeah. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, it's kind of like back in the day when they did the Ultimate Fighter, the season finale fight night card would always basically just be all of the people from Tough fighting each other. This, from like a Road to UFC perspective, this kind of feels the same way to me. Like, I don't watch the Road to UFC cards, which I know makes me a casual, but for that reason, I look at a lot of these names and I'm like, you have UFC experience, but I don't know who you are. So not much jumps off the page. The bout order's weird as well. Like, Lonnie Kavanagh should probably not be that low down against Charles Johnson. Like, that's a main card fight. It's definitely a main card fight. I don't know why it's not on the main card. But yeah, I think the less said about this card, the better, to be honest. So without further ado, we should probably get into it. So we're going to be breaking down three fights. We have decided to take the Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling fight, which I'm going to look into, the Sergei Pavlovich versus Waldo Cortes Acosta fight, which Josh is going to look into, and Sumudaerji versus Kevin Borjas, which Dom is going to look into. So skipping the main event, but Zhang is minus 400, so I think you can probably imagine against a very chinny Johnny Walker. You kind of know how that one's going to go. So let's take a look at the co-main event. We have Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling taking place at featherweight. This is obviously a grappler's delight. It's two guys who have always kind of done their best work with their grappling and submission game. Kind of interesting to see what's going to happen here. It's quite exciting fight to really sort of get your teeth into when you think about it. But the one thing that really stands out to me is the MMA wrestling and grappling ability of Aljamain Sterling versus that of Brian Ortega. I think that's where the biggest gap in skill is here. And considering that's Aljamain's primary source of success in his career, I think that immediately creates kind of warning signs for Brian Ortega. In a sport like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when you have someone who is high level, you usually find that their defensive capabilities match their offensive capabilities. So Aljamain Sterling defensively is going to be very good compared to his offensive ability, which obviously leads into the fact that Brian Ortega is known for being very dangerous when it comes to a submission threat. And if that's not on the cards for him, I think his chances of winning a fight obviously diminish a fair amount. I mean, if you look at Brian Ortega's career from start to finish in the UFC, he's been a guy that has capitalized on big moments that really sort of paper over the cracks of like very subpar minute winning. I mean, his run to a title shot before he fought Frankie Edgar was just this underdog story of complete chaos where he was usually 2 rounds down and then just pulled out a massive finish in the third. So, you know, he is obviously therefore very, very dangerous, and we need, you know, you need to be careful of that if you are taking the Sterling side here. But I think that minute to minute, Aljamain Sterling is, as I said, the better MMA wrestler grappler. And so once he manages to work his way through the submission threat, and there will be a threat, but I think he should be able to just iron out the creases and get himself to a position of safety where he wants to be. And from there, it's probably going to be relatively comfortable for Sterling on the mat. So, yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit before we went on air, but what a time to be looking at a fight like this off the back of Khamzat Chimaev basically doing the very safe but obviously, you know, respectable thing of moving his way past DDP's guard and just sitting in those kind of danger-free spots like side control and obviously setting up a crucifix. So if Aljamain Sterling wants to just move past the guard of Brian Ortega, he's chilling, really. And I don't think Brian Ortega is going to have the grappling capability to find his way either back to a feet or find his way back to his guard and set up his submissions again. Elsewhere, there's also the narrative that Brian Ortega is on a little bit of a decline. He's coming off the back of a pretty dominant loss to Diego Lopes. That's the third time now, in my opinion, that I have seen Brian Ortega get significantly battered in a fight and really not look up to the standard of the opposition. Obviously, the others were against Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski. You can't necessarily blame him for that, but you know, when we're looking at fighters having very short careers in the grand scheme of things, and them having to sort of minimize the damage and increase their longevity, Brian Ortega taking another one of those like pretty hard to watch like whippings is concerning for his long-term career. I mean, he's got less fights professionally than Aljamain Sterling, but I would say in terms of fight years, he's more shop worn, and I think it kind of shows in his fights because Aljamain Sterling has looked like a new man almost at featherweight. He's obviously a former bantamweight champion and is stepping up in weight here. Well, he's moved up the weight class a couple of fights ago, but he's still, you know, operating at a very impressive level, and I would say arguably making improvements. I think his the way he's navigated the striking in his fight against Calvin Kattar and also his you know, very competitive loss to Movsar Evloev, he looked a lot more competent and a lot more comfortable in the striking realms, and I think that's going to be great here because he's at another danger disadvantage in the striking to Ortega. Ortega is somebody who hits quite hard. He's got quite good boxing. I do think he's a bit of an overrated striker from that one performance against Chan Sung Jung, but overall, he's, you know, he does have an element of dangerousness, and Sterling will have to be careful and respect him on the feet. But I think Aljo can navigate those moments, and the fight isn't going to be determined by what happens on the feet. So, in my opinion, this is Aljamain Sterling's fight to lose. It's pretty clear how he goes about doing it. We're currently looking at him at around minus 250 on the money line, which when I first saw the line and before I'd really dove into tape for this one, I did think that minus 250 was a bit steep. And I still do think it's a little bit steep just because Sterling is going to have to put himself in the most dangerous moments, i.e. Brian Ortega's grappling realm, to win this fight probably. So, you know, he's not going to be too far away from a very quick loss on his path to victory. So there is something to be careful of. But I do think that Sterling should just rise to the occasion and prove to be the better man more consistently. So minus 200 kind of feels about right to me, which is not quite where the money line is. However, Brian Ortega is a very, very durable guy. I talked about those whippings to Holloway, Volkanovski, and Diego Lopez, but he didn't get finished in any of them. He's super durable, and as I said earlier on as well, high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu offense means high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu defense. I don't think Sterling finishes Ortega on the mat either. So if I think Sterling's a superior fighter across 15 minutes, and I don't think Ortega gets finished, it leans us towards Aljamain Sterling by decision, which I think is a very fair way to be playing this fight. And I think if you can get that at around -125, I think that is a really nice bet. Obviously, betting on one of 7 outcomes is a bit sketchy at minus money, but I think that is one that should cruise with relative ease. So the pick for me is definitely going to be Aljamain Sterling. I'm quite confident that he does get the job done. But from a betting perspective, I think taking him by decision is one of the more appealing betting angles going into this card. We obviously don't have props yet, so I'm hoping it doesn't get steamed, but -125 seems quite good to me. How about you guys? Any other thoughts?
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I reckon Will pretty much hammered each nail on the head. I don't really have too much to say here. I do have a bit of a curiosity about Ortega's weight cut to 145 plus the travel time to China and all that stuff. I mean, Ortega doesn't really look too bad on the scale sometimes, but he does have to cut weight, whereas Sterling doesn't have to cut weight. Like, he's more of a natural 145er compared to Ortega, who is more a lightweight, I'd say, walking around that weight area. This is going to be a pretty good 5-round fight. I mean, this is one of those rare moments in which a co-main is a 5-rounder, despite there being no belt on the line. So that's going to be pretty cool, pretty intriguing. Sterling would have the striking advantage. He is the funk master, man. Like, you can't really doubt him in pulling off some really slick striking. And Will did highlight that Ortega is durable, but to me personally, that just means he gets hit a lot. So yeah, he's durable, but so is a car, right? You can smack a car all you want, and it'll still run fine. So same as Ortega, really. But yeah, if this is a wrestling heavy fight, I do expect Sterling's high pace and like maybe strength to be in play here. He is a partner or a sparring partner or whatever with Merab Dvalishvili, and that's pretty advantageous to an extent. But then again, Ortega, as soon as the fight gets to the ground, he could pull off some crazy triangle choke or whatever, and the water gets a bit murky when grappling's involved. I'm not a great person when it comes to breaking down grappling by any means, but I do think that no matter what happens, Sterling is quite equipped to deal with whatever position Ortega puts him in. And so my pick here, or my +1 here, would be, Sterling. And yeah, that should bring it to a 4 or a high.
Yeah, so with the upvote from Josh, it's a 4 or high. I think I will just abstain from upvoting it because I think high is probably where it should be, and I don't think it should be very high, and would like to make the case for Brian Ortega. So, I mean, whilst I agree, Aljamain is definitely the funkier, better striker. Yeah, probably he's better, but he's definitely not more powerful. His record speaks for itself. More than half of his fights go to decision, whether he wins or loses. He's got 12 decisions out of 21 UFC fights. So he's way more experienced than Ortega. So I think you talked about the wrestling pedigree. He's also just generally, been in the UFC twice as long as Ortega. But in the short number of fights that Ortega's had, he's a finishing machine. He's got 3 KOs and 4 subs. Of his 8 wins, he's got 1 decision win and 2 decision losses, and he's been finished twice. So, like, for me, the problem with the line, which when I saw it was +250 for Ortega, -300 for Sterling, is just not factoring in that Sterling won't have a lot of finishing upside. He came up from bantamweight, so he wasn't getting a lot of KOs at bantamweight, was he? So he's not going to get a lot of KOs at featherweight. So I think this is kind of a nice matchup for Ortega. If Ortega wants to push himself into a new realm of, like, advancing his wrestling or whatever it is, if he wants to beat Ortega 2.0, now would be a good time to show up and be Ortega 2.0. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but I just felt the line was very disrespectful of Ortega and everything he's achieved. Okay, he's definitely in poor form. I definitely take the point about him declining, but his losses, his 4 losses in the UFC are Diego Lopez, Yair Rodriguez, which was an injury. So yeah, let's just strike that one. Actually, he's got 3 losses: Volkanovski, Holloway, and Lopez. So they're not bad people to lose to when you put it that way, right? So I think he's in with a shot here. I really do. I think he's got a chance. he's going to have to finish Aljamain Sterling. I mean, could he win a decision? It would be one of those crazy fights where lots of big moments happen. Aljamain gets rocked on the feet, or he's in a really nasty sub position. I can't see the decision as easily, but I have to think about that. But I think all the finishing upside in this fight is with Ortega. I completely agree with Will's analysis. I think that Sterling should be the favorite. I think Sterling likely wins the decision. I just have something in back of my mind saying, well, these odds are really wrong. And I think Ortega still has something to prove. He's not young anymore. He's 34. So this is probably the last chance saloon for him. Having said that, I think Aljamain's the same age. Aljamain is maybe even older. Aljamain's 36 at featherweight. Yeah, so miles on the clock. There are a lot of miles on the clock for Aljamain, but I agree that he hasn't taken the level of damage that Ortega has, which would be remiss of me not to say he did take the life beating from Max Holloway, where he just got punched like similar to Keita, like a huge number of times. I don't know the number of significant strikes, but it was in the hundreds, and that's never good for your career, as we've seen with Keita. So we could have a Keita situation on our hands here, and I don't want to be on the wrong side of that, but yeah, but just something about this fight was just making me feel like, yeah, I don't know. I guess, you know, Aljo by decision certainly makes a lot of sense, but if Ortega becomes the first person to sub Aljamain, it wouldn't hugely surprise me, because I mean that's his remit. And if you look at all of Aljamain's opponents, he's not faced anyone of the jiu-jitsu that Brian Ortega has, and Ortega nearly famously subbed Volkanovski. I think he was like probably half a second away, and his squeeze just didn't last long enough, and he started to release a little bit, and Volt came back to consciousness. Any final thoughts from you, Will?
Yeah, I feel like the more we think about the Brian Ortega finishing side, the less confident I get in Aljo. But yeah, I mean, it's there. We know it's there. It's when you're fighting Brian Ortega, you've got to be very careful. And Aljo will all the same, regardless of how skilled I think he is. Anyone can be submitted. So yeah, there are risks, but I think that, you know, if that is Ortega's main path to victory, it shouldn't take too much for Sterling to be able to negate it. So, you know, just got to hope that he doesn't make a mistake.
Yeah, this is my pick of the whole breakdown part of this podcast. I am barely infused when it comes to like this whole fight because it is a heavyweight, and whilst there are implications here, I don't really think that there are that many. Like Pavlovich obviously has torn his way through the heavyweight division before. He has knocked out some of the biggest names in the division. No matter how weak the division looks now, they're still pretty big names. He is going to have a clear power advantage in this fight because I don't believe Cortes Acosta has fought a power puncher before. I mean, he's fought heavyweights, but not ones that can throw lead like Pavlovich can. The 8-inch reach advantage of Pavlovich is going to be pretty prevalent here, and whilst the graphic here shows that Cortes Acosta does have a 70-inch reach, that is wrong, I believe. I believe he has a 78-inch reach, so the 6-inch reach advantage of Pavlovich, is going to be pretty prevalent here. I mean, it's two strikers having at it, so I mean, either way, the longer reach fighter is going to be more effective when it comes to the jabs or the overhands or whatever. Pavlovich has faced more tougher competition than Cortes Acosta has, so there is that. He is more battle tested. He is more experienced in fighting the more trickier opponents. And whilst Cortes Acosta does have a fairly interesting style of, you know, being patient until he's not patient, I do think that Pavlovich is just going to overwhelm Cortes Acosta with the power shots, as is heavyweight tradition. However, on the side of Cortes Acosta, he does have a very good leg kick, and given that this is a opposite stance fight where I believe Pavlovich is the orthodox and Cortes Acosta is the southpaw, I could be wrong. Maybe that's a bit switched here, but either way, that leg kick is going to be an inside leg kick, which could off balance Pavlovich here, and I expect that to land often, because Cortes Acosta does for those leg kicks pretty often. He has been leg kicked before, but I guess he can also throw leg kicks. There really isn't too much to know about this fight. I mean, ultimately, it is a fight that can be simply described as big boys swinging. Like whoever lands a shot harder probably wins. Whoever is a more cleaner striker wins. I don't think there's going to be any wrestling or grappling or whatever. It's just going to be a good old slobber knocker fight where Pavlovich is going to likely end up the winner because of his power and his length and his imposing on Cortes Acosta style, whereas Cortes Acosta is going to be a bit more tepid with his approach, a bit more chill, throw some leg kicks here and there, but ultimately just eat shots, I guess. I mean, that's always been Cortes Acosta's thing. He always likes to eat shots. But yeah, I'm with Pavlovich here. I do believe that he is going to look like the more dominant heavyweight here, and I'm hoping to see that he wins in fantastic fashion because his rise to the top has really been great to see. He was like a boogeyman of the division, but now because of his recent performances and like his lackluster wins and all that stuff, I don't know, like his whole aura as a fighter is just gone. So I'm hoping we see a more dangerous, explosive Pavlovich here and not one that's kind of taking the tea break, So that's my pick here. I got Pavlovich by whatever, probably by KO. I mean, yeah, likely by KO. And the confidence will be a nice 2.
Yes, I thought it was interesting when you said you don't think that Pavlovich will take Waldo, Cortes, Acosta down because, of course, no one wants to see that. But in his very last fight, he took down Jairzinho Rosenstruck. He took him down 4 times. And I mean, Jairzinho is he's a big striker with a lot of power. So I guess he felt like, well, he's a wrestler by background, so I'll take him down. And the only time I think that Cortes Acosta has looked sort of out of sorts really was when he was taken down basically by Marcos Rogerio de Lima. So it seems to me, since we're in the Chimaev era, that the best thing for Pavlovich to do would be to just take this guy down and lie on him for 3 rounds. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'd love to see the KO. But to justify the price tag, so of course, this is a betting discussion as well as a fight discussion. He's a big favorite, Pavlovich, right? He's sitting at minus 250. Maybe a little bit of money's coming on the Cortes Acosta side. I don't know that Pavlovich, apart from having a reach advantage, is not a much better striker than Waldo Cortes Acosta. I think Acosta, while he's shorter or not as long, he's got a great jab and he's stayed pretty safe against most of his opponents. You mentioned before we came on about Rebelis de Spain. I think Waldo shot on him, right? Took him down. So that's confusing. Now we're going around the houses. Who's going to shoot on who? Is Waldo going to shoot on Pavlovich? I think one of these guys is going to shoot on each other because they're not going to like the power of the other. So is it Pavlovich going to shoot on Waldo, or is Waldo going to shoot on Pavlovich, or is it a first round KO? What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I think it's funny that we have what looks like a pretty obvious heavyweight slobber knocker, but the grappling is kind of like secretly hiding in plain sight. Because I went back and forth on the wrestling narrative here too, which is just seems very contrarian. And yeah, I think it is worth raising because Pavlovich did have a very grappling focused approach to the Rosenstruck fight, which I could see him maybe doing here, but I actually think it would be a bad idea. You are right in that Marcos Rogerio de Lima showed that is where Waldo Cortes Acosta is weakest. But, I took that information and I bet Sergei Spivak a few months ago. And I think that Waldo's takedown defense has really improved. It looked very good there. I think Spivak is the best wrestler of all the names we've mentioned on this breakdown so far, I think. And he didn't have any real success at getting anything from Waldo Cortes Acosta there. Obviously, very different body type to Sergei Pavlovich, a lot less power-based, so maybe there's a difference there. But yeah, I don't think it's the right idea for Pavlovich to try and grapple here because I think he has natural advantages in the striking. As Josh said, big difference in power here. And when you go through Waldo's career in the UFC. It's actually insane that he's fought as many fights as he has, but hasn't actually met someone yet who is a prolific KO artist. As you say, Rebelis de Spain is probably the only exception there, but Waldo did take him down again. Like that kind of. It's kind of unfair to sort of talk about him beating a power puncher when the fight didn't have any real time on the feet for there to be a significant opportunity for the power punching to be demonstrated. So I think that the striking is kind of where we're going to have to focus in terms of trying to pick a winner. And I'm thinking that Pavlovich's power advantage is just going to see him march Waldo Cortes Acosta down. I think the reach advantage on Pavlovich's side is also quite a tricky thing because that should help him, obviously be able to reach, pardon the pun, Waldo to be landing the shots that he needs to. And I just think Waldo's going to suffer that lack of respect. I think he is somebody who does fight decent at range, but I don't think his footwork and his agility is there to play that matador type role. And I just think that eventually he's going to get sort of corralled against the fence or just pushed backwards to the point where Pavlovich is going to unload on him. I do think Waldo's got a really good chin though, so I actually don't know how I feel about Pavlovich finishing. I'm not. When I imagine this fight in my mind's eye, I don't see Pavlovich slumping him in a minute like he has done to all the other dudes. So yeah, I think when I think about this fight and I do break it down, all signs kind of point towards Pavlovich dominance. But at the same time, yeah, minus 250 does feel a little bit. I'm uncertain about it because I think that if something goes a bit different in this fight, if Pavlovich decides to wrestle or if Waldo has kind of really prioritized some sort of matador-based game plan on the feet, or if Waldo wants to attempt wrestling himself, because you referenced Marcos Rogerio de Lima having success against Waldo on the grappling, but Alistair Overeem had success against Pavlovich in the grappling too. So I guess there is equal reason to believe that either man's pretty bad on bottom. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those fights where I think if you really do zoom out and you look at it a little bit more basically, Pavlovich really should be favored and really should be getting the win. But it's hard to know with a fight as volatile as a heavyweight one, where one punch can literally turn the tide. It's hard to know exactly where to line something like that. But yeah, I think Pavlovich should be getting the nod here, and I would +1 it as well from a confidence perspective.
Yeah, so it goes up to a medium confidence pick with a +1 from Will. Again, I'm going to abstain just because I agree with everything you said, Will. And before we come back to Josh, just the final thing to say is Volkov made it look pretty easy to matador Pavlovich. He didn't really take any big damage. Of course, Volkov has a much different height. I think he's much taller than Cortes Acosta. So not exactly the same, but there is a template where if it's going to stay standing. My thought was that Pavlovich is way more powerful than Sergei Spivak. So if he decided to double leg Waldo, it might surprise him, might mix it in, might justify being a big favorite, just to have that, not necessarily to utilize wrestling, but to sort of mix in a takedown would just keep Waldo guessing. Because I don't, yeah, I mean, I guess Waldo has shot as well before, but I don't think Waldo is going to be shooting on Pavlovich. That was my assumption. Josh, after hearing these sort of like discussions, what are your final thoughts?
I mean, I didn't really even consider the wrestling aspect of this fight. Like, whenever I see heavyweight, I always think, all right, it's going to be a brawl. It's going to be a punching warfare kind of fight. But when it comes to the wrestling, I mean, it does make sense that we could see at least some level changes here and there. But I just don't really think it's going to be too prevalent. Like, I reckon, like maybe from a psychological perspective, I'm no psychologist by any means, but like Pavlovich maybe is going to look to get some hype back from getting a knockout, so he wants to be incentivized to get that KO win over Waldo. So yeah, I mean, I'll have to wait and see, because like when it comes to the whole wrestling thing, it reminds me of the whole discussion we had last week about DDP and his takedown defense against Chimaev, right? We don't know how good his takedown defense is, or was going to be against Chimaev, and that proved to be pretty bad. But in this case, we don't know how good Cortes Acosta's takedown defense is compared to Pavlovich and vice versa. So there will be some sort of like I don't know, a bit like a weariness here, I guess, when it comes to the wrestling. So yeah, I still think that it's going to be a slobber knocker, really.
Okay, well, speaking of takedowns and level changes, this is a fight that will probably not involve any of those. So that was a nice segue. Kevin Borjas against Sumudaerji. Kevin Borjas has not shot a single takedown in his UFC tenure. He's had 3 fights in the UFC, or 4 if you include the Dana White's Contender Series. Sumudaerji has had twice as many fights as Borjas. He's had 8 fights. They're both even Stevens in their records, 4-4 Sumudaerji, 2-2 Borjas, if you include the Dana White's Contender Series. And they're both strikers. They like to stand and bang. I guess I'll talk about Sumudaerji first. So he's like a tall, very tall for flyweight. This is a flyweight fight. It says here 5'8", but I think I've seen 5'9" elsewhere. So he's basically the tallest you can be at flyweight, and he's, looks like he's must be cutting so much weight to get down there. And I think that sometimes has been evident in his performances. But yeah, he's tall and rangy. He's more of a counter striker. He's a southpaw, and he's pretty low volume. And I've watched his last 4 fights today, and he dropped round 1 in all 4 of those fights. So those fights were starting 4 fights back. He fought Matt Schnell, which was, everyone knows the Matt Schnell fight. It was an epic fight. But you may not remember the first round, which was not as eventful as the second round. In the first round, Schnell basically, there was a bit of grappling. Schnell ended up on top and giving notable damage, some punches from top position to win round 1. And then the famous round 2 happened, where Sumudaerji basically had Schnell at death's door. Schnell rallied and submitted Sumudaerji in a fight that I think Sumudaerji probably should have won. But, Schnell's a great fighter and very entertaining to watch his fights. He's retired now. The next fight, Tim Elliott, that's Tim Elliott of the last weekend, who got the shock upset against Asakura. He basically did the same thing to Sumudaerji, just subbed him in against the grain. I think he was an underdog and subbed Sumudaerji in round 1. 2 fights back, Sumudaerji took on Charles Johnson. He's got some pretty good calf kicks, so Sumudaerji was calf kicking Johnson early. However, Johnson closed the distance, forward pressure, and won the first round. Sumudaerji was trying to circle away on the outside, and he got caught on the cage, and Johnson was able to unload on him and do punches and damage. And in round 2, this is where Johnson really took over. It continued stalking Sumudaerji, eventually got him against the cage, dropped him, and it looked like a finishing sequence. So Sumudaerji was literally slumped in a crouching position, taking punches. I don't know how he survived, but he managed to grab a leg of Charles Johnson and reverse position. So I managed to take him down and get on top of him and almost subbed him. So obviously he'd been working on his grappling game since he'd lost the last 2 fights by sub. He threw up a triangle from guard and he nearly armbarred Johnson. I think Johnson was like, what the hell's going on here? I thought I'd won this fight and now I'm about to be armbarred. So he was a bit shocked, but he clearly had won the first 2 rounds. Third round was relatively uneventful. It went to Sumudaerji. I think that's fair. The fight ended with Sumudaerji attempting a Darce choke on Charles Johnson. It was a clear 29-28, but I think, it showed that Sumudaerji had made some progress in grappling anyway, so good for him. The last fight, Sumudaerji took on Mitch Raposo, like a relative unknown. I think he came off the Ultimate Fighter. He dropped round 1 to Mitch Raposo by basically just being less busy. So yeah, he's a slow starter. He doesn't throw many strikes in his fights, but he's a counter striker and he's accurate. And when he does throw, he does have power. Onto the other side of the fight, Borjas, who's 2-2. He's a slick striker. He has good output, so he's always jabbing. He's always doing something. He's busy. He had a great performance on Dana White's Contender Series. He won a unanimous 29-28 to seal his spot on the roster against a grappler. And then, so his last 3 fights, he fought Josh Van, right? And I don't know if many people know about this fight because I didn't know about it. So I watched it. He beat Van up in the first round. He had a beautiful 1-2, dropped Van. It wasn't scored as a knockdown on UFC stats, but Van was sitting on the canvas. So I'm just confused. I guess if you pop up really quickly, They sometimes don't score it, but he was sitting on the canvas after the 1-2. So for me, that was, night and day as a knockdown. And he has a really stiff jab, like a nice stiff jab, and it was causing problems for Van early on and into round 2. However, Van, we all know Van by this point. Van just upped the output, the fabled Van pressure, combined with ripping body shots, just wore Borjas down. And in the second half of round 2, he just couldn't keep up with the Van volume. And Borjas stayed in the fight in round 3. That was the thing that impressed me. He was getting drowned by Van's volume, but he didn't quit on himself. And he even caught Van with a big right hand late in the fight. And that triggered Van to shoot a takedown on Borjas, which Borjas reversed, but then ended up on bottom to end the fight. It was a great fight. And the thing that won the fight for Van was his volume. That's something that Sumudaerji doesn't have. So 2 more fights to go for Borjas. He fought Alessandro Costa. This is a fight he lost, and Costa was scored as having a knockdown in this fight. But I watched the fight; it was only short, a round and a half. First round was clearly being won by Borjas, and then Costa did some damage at the end of the fight with some big left strike. And yeah, the knockdown came in the second round. It was heavy calf kicks from Costa that forced Borjas onto the canvas, and that was scored as a knockdown. So it wasn't because of a head strike. It wasn't because of a body shot. It was calf kicks that caused the knockdown. I mean, yeah, it's good to know when you watch a fight and you're like, oh, he got knocked down. It wasn't because he, typical durability issue. It was a calf issue. So yeah, something to be wary of, but it wasn't like body or head damage. And then the last fight, he fought Ronaldo Rodriguez in Mexico City, a guy who was on a 7-fight win streak. The guy missed weight by 2 pounds, and he just schooled this guy, like dropped him in round 1, and then won every single round 30-27 in enemy territory, which is what he's going to have to do here, because he's an underdog here. He's going into enemy territory in Shanghai, but logistics to note for this fight: Borjas is already at the UFC PI in Shanghai. He arrived at least on August the 16th. That's Saturday, so at least 1 week, if not earlier. Sumudaerji is coming from Tibet, which I checked on a map is on the other side of the country, a 6-hour flight away from Shanghai. I think the main take home here is that this is going to be a stand-up affair. I don't anticipate any grappling. I'll be very, very surprised if we have any grappling, unless it's through a knockdown or some sort of scramble like that. Sumudaerji has a big height and reach advantage, and that is probably why he's a favorite here, as well as fighting on home soil. As I said, he's going to circle and look to counter strike. Borjas is going to have to pressure, even though he's not really a pressure fighter himself. He's a bit more of a counter striker, so it's going to force him to have to put the pressure on. He has done that. He was sort of pressuring at moments in the Van fight, moments in the Dana White Contender Series fight, and moments against Costa in round 1. So he's more active. He's better at combos. He's going to rip the body. Sumudaerji's a large target. Obviously, he's tall, so I think that's really going to help here. And I think the durability, honestly, is in favor of Borjas. I have not really seen Borjas, badly hurt, except for the calf kicks. So that's the one area that we have to watch out for, because Sumudaerji has the ability to calf kick. But Sumudaerji's been hurt quite badly in the fights that I watched. He was hurt badly against Johnson. He was hurt badly against Snell. It's really interesting for me that Borjas isn't even an underdog here, because I think if it wasn't in China, I'd say Borjas should be a slight favorite. If not, it should be evens. In China, of course, maybe you'll fall victim to some biased judging. And I think a fun fact, in the 4 fights that Borjas has had in the UFC, including Dana White's Contender Series, he's landed 260 strikes. And in the 8 fights that Sumudaerji's had in the UFC, he's only landed 100 more at 360. So to close on that, I will open the floor to Will and Josh.
Yeah, I kind of went early with looking at tape for this one, just because I, at a glance, looked at their Tapology records and couldn't really see anything significant that was going to split these two. So it immediately made me question why there was an underdog here. And from watching a little bit of tape on both guys, it became quite apparent that this is going to be a very close fight, and any sort of differences between them feel quite small and, in a grand scheme of things, a little bit more insignificant. So it's two guys who, as you rightly said, Dom, have historically had defensive grappling kind of concerns that kind of overarch their better striking acumen. And this is going to be a striking fight. We don't think we're going to get grappling here, hopefully. The output wise, the metrics are quite similar, I guess. I mean, obviously, looking at a career average is a bit of a skewed thing, especially when you're being grappled by opponents, because obviously that racks up your fight time, but it doesn't see you landing significant strikes. But I watched the tape. I looked at both guys, and my overall conclusion was just like, this is just going to be close. I think there is a power advantage on the side of Borjas, and there is a durability disadvantage on the side of Sumudaerji, which I did think was probably going to lean me more to the Borjas side overall. But as you said, the size is hard to account for. That's something recently I've been struggling with in fights, is not being able to really imagine how two people are going to look inside the cage when facing off against each other. And also, obviously, the home advantage, as you mentioned. These are the couple of things I am kind of concerned about. I do think Sumudaerji did some nice leg kick work early on against Charles Johnson as well. That was something to look at, considering Acosta had a great amount of success against Borjas doing that. And if Sumudaerji's done his due diligence, that should be a part of his game plan. That does concern me. But yeah, when trying to come to a conclusion, I really do just sort of see a pick'em. And in terms of the betting line, this fight isn't a pick'em. You have Borjas, a clear underdog. I think he's around plus 125, plus 130. And it's only sort of intangibles that aren't guaranteed to come to the surface that really make me think Sumudaerji deserves to be favorite. I mean, there's also the narrative that Sumudaerji is still riding on the coattails of former success, because prior to that Matt Schnell fight, he was being looked at as a top 15 guy. I remember the narrative. I think he may have even been in the top 15, because flyweight is a division that doesn't have a whole lot of depth. I'm pretty sure he was between 10 and 15 in the rankings at the time. And to put that into context, he got to that position by beating Andrei Sukumtov, Malcolm Gordon, Zaruk Adashev. That is literally all he did to get there, which is insane, because flyweight is a division that did not have a lot of depth during this time. He's since gone on to, win a split decision, I think, against Mitch Raposo. Maybe that was unanimous. Maybe I'm getting that confused. But you can't really look at someone's record and knock them for that, because you can only beat who's put in front of you. But I do think that there is a sort of level of Sumudaerji is kind of looked at with respect. I think he's somebody that we do think is a very high level striker. But I don't actually really know where the evidence to suggest that it's like a top 15 talent really comes from. So I think that in a way people are kind of assuming that there is a difference in caliber and a golf in skill here, but the tape really just didn't show me that. So yeah, the Borjas on the underdog side is definitely the side to be on for this one, I think. So in terms of upvoting the confidence, I will also give it an upvote.
Yeah, I didn't actually say that the pick was Borjas, and the confidence was low for those reasons you stated about it being close.
Yeah, I don't have much to add here when it comes to the styles or whatever for both fighters. I do want to highlight, however, the record of Sumudaerji. He has a history of fighting in a Chinese organization called the Wulin Feng, WLF. Historically, that organization has been a red flag that screams at me every time I look at a record. Because whenever you look at someone who fights in that organization, who is in the UFC, they have fought, for lack of a better term, dog shit opponents, right? Absolute, the worst of the worst. So Sumudaerji's record is a bit bloated because of those wins against those really, really fighters, right? That makes me want to err on the side of Borjas here, because I do think that, as Will and Dom have said, this is a more near even odds fight, right? So I'm just going to go +1 that as well, and warn you guys that not to trust Sumudaerji's record, because it's bad. It's horrible, and that whole organization is just a red flag.
Yeah, so with +1 from both the guys. We have a high confidence in Borjas, who is the underdog. And just a final word from me is that as Will mentioned, I think the KO is live here for Borjas. I think that if he can get inside and work his combos, I think he can finish Sumudaerji. I think it's less likely than the decision, but if the odds are very long, yeah, that's going to be interesting to see that. I'd want quite long odds on it, 4 or 5 to 1, something like that. But I'll definitely be looking at that. Also, there's the ability to take the decision no action prop, which would protect you from a robbery on the judges' scorecards and open you up to that. That's any finish by Borjas.
So onwards to the bets for this week. I feel like it might be a smaller slate for a majority of people who are trying to bet on this card. I've highlighted a few. I've bet a couple already. So Aljamain Sterling by decision. I've already mentioned that in the breakdown itself. That's something I'm quite keen on. I'm hoping for -125 or better. But I think if it's under -150, I still might play it. It just seems like quite a confident angle, in my opinion. I've also parlayed Sergei Pavlovich with Louis Lee Scott on Dana White's Contender Series. I know a little bit about Louis Lee Scott. I think this is just going to be a golfing skill. His opponent looks like a little bit of a can crusher. Doesn't really look like he's got the experience that Scott has. So I'm hoping for an easy kind of Dana White's Contender Series squash match, which you do get occasionally. That parlay takes us to -127, so I've got 1.5 units on that. As we just talked about, I've got 1.5 units on Kevin Borjas at +130. I don't really see why he's the underdog. It's a very simple play of I see a pick'em and there's value on a line in regards to that. I mean, if you gave me the odds the other way around, I'd be playing Sumudaerji at +130. And finally, Maheshate. I started off by looking into this fight against Gage Young, and I don't think that Maheshate should be the underdog. I think that Gage Young is being given too much credit for the fights that he has had in the UFC so far, whereas Maheshate has kind of been dragged through the mud for a loss streak. But stylistically, when you look at the two of them striking against each other, Gage Young is really lacking in power and anything other than just sort of pumping a jab. And I think that Maheshate should be able to give him lots of different looks there. And as long as Gage Young doesn't grapple, which I'm a bit concerned about, but I cannot confirm that he's going to, I think Maheshate really should be the favourite there on home soil. So at +110 or better, I'll definitely will be taking him for 1.5 units as well.
Yep, so I'm doing the same bet as Will, taking Kevin Borjas money line, 1.5 units. It can still be found for +140 if you look hard enough. I think the money is coming in on, or back in on Borjas. So initially money came in on Sumudaerji, and now money's coming in on Borjas. I think it's one of these fights that people really need to think about. So if you just look at it, you go, oh, it's the Chinese guy in China. But then actually he's Tibetan technically. You look into it and you're like, Borjas is the side. It's fairly, it's not that hidden. You don't have to think about it too much. You just have to think about it for a little bit and you'll get to the Borjas side. So I do think it's going to close. I do think it's going to end. I think it's going to end up at pick'em odds. So yeah, that's what we try to do, try to offer the value here. So we flagged it. Second is Charles Johnson, who already the value is evaporating, right? This guy opened at +330 against Lonnie Kavanagh, which obviously I was nowhere near seeing that line. Even now, the line is not at 180, but I did pull the trigger at 180, just half a unit. Maybe a little bit regretfully that I didn't put more, but I do think Kavanagh's very, very good, very talented, and has the tools to beat Charles Johnson. I just think Charles Johnson has got like more than 10 UFC fights, right? And he's beaten, Joshua Van amongst other people. He can definitely win this fight against Lonnie Kavanagh and give him a vet lesson. So yeah, if you can get 2-1 odds on Johnson, it's pretty much a no-brainer now. I've had some chance to think about it. I do want to watch Lonnie Kavanagh's fights again. I know he's been taking people down. That's how he's been winning. I know he's very quick and fleet-footed. But I think that Charles Johnson can definitely keep up with him in the striking, mixing his own ground game. It's going to be interesting. And then finally, I agree with the Aljo decision prop. I'm just interested in being contrarian and taking Ortega decision no action, which means I get all the finishing upside of Ortega without the risk of the typical Aljo game plan. In fact, you can play both. You can play Aljo decision and Ortega decision no action. They are complementary bets. What have you got, Josh?
Yeah, normally I have a parlay with a single bet here, but this time it's just going to be 3 single bets here. So firstly, you've got Pavlovich via KO round 2 or 3. I do think that the first round is going to be a bit of a feeling out process, and I also feel like the KO round 2 or round 3 bet is going to be much nicer to the eyes, odds-wise, than like a KO round 1 or round 2. The second bet there, as you can see, is a Sterling via point or decision. That one just basically reflects what Will said with his breakdown. Sterling is obviously going to probably look better in that 5-round fight, so I'm sticking to that. And oh god, these names are going to kill me. Nurgaje and Sati Baldiev ending KO. That's a highlight one for me because I found it last night that both fighters are pretty prolific knockout artists, and when that happens at the light heavyweight division, you can't help but go with that kind of prop. So that's all I got for this weekend or this week, yeah.
I think you did a good job of pronouncing that, better than I could do anyway. Just looks like a load of consonants. Let's move on to the $100 challenge. We lost our Drickus Duplessis bet last week, which was very sad. So we have $50 on him, taking our balance down to $220. We started with 100, so we're up $120. Record is 5-2. You can see all the bets here. We haven't placed a bet every single week, but these are the 7 weeks that we've placed bets. And this week we're interested in Aljamain Sterling by decision, or potentially playing Borjas moneyline. We'll make that decision once the Aljo prop is lined, and then discuss it and work out what we think is the best value. So to end, we're going to discuss the very painful situation that happened last night and where it leaves the middleweight division. Josh, why don't you give us your thoughts?
Yeah, it was a pretty tough one to watch, wasn't it? Like, Chimaev is not the most interesting champion ever because we know what he's going to do. Like, when DDP was the champion, we looked at his fights with awe because how can someone with that style win his fights? And I kind of broke down the middleweight division or the ranked part of it in a tweet a while ago, or well, last night. That is a while ago. And essentially, I'm just going to read it off the cuff here. So DDP, he just fought Chimaev, but if he worked on his takedown defense, it could be a fascinating rematch, although I don't think many people are that excited because, frankly, if it's a rinse and repeat of last time, then who wants to see that, right? Imavov, he fights Borrello soon, but it could give Chimaev a run for his money because Imavov does have fairly technical takedown defense, as evidenced by his fight against Brendan Allen, even though Brendan Allen's takedowns were crap. Strickland was quite vocal about fighting Chimaev, and I just don't see that working out for him because even though Strickland does have good takedown defense, he fights like a nun. Like it is so weird how he fights and how he succeeds. I can't really see him doing too well against Boars, Adesanya, no chance. No way in hell is Adesanya going to win against Chimaev. RDR will at least have a chance because of his grappling background. His really long, lengthy limbs could negate the long, lengthy limbs of Chimaev. So there could be some interesting grappling scenarios there. Borrello, as I said, with the Imavov fight, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But I do think that the fighting nerds have a decent system of preparation, and that could also make it a lot more interesting to watch compared to Chimaev versus DDP again. And Hernandez is a highlight one for me because firstly, he's got the cardio, he's got the takedown offense to go with his takedown defense. He has been on the tear recently with his recent win over Dolidze. So if he is up next, or maybe not up next, but if he is in the running for a championship spot or a fight, then hell yeah, I'm probably going to pick Hernandez as a pick and maybe as a dog bet. But other than that, I feel like we are in dark days when it comes to Chimaev being a champion, because we just know what to expect, and it's just going to be a cuddle fest with some very soft strikes and the intermittent screaming of "I'll kill everybody." I just don't like Chimaev, as you can tell. So I'm going to hand it off swiftly to Will or Dom here. What do you guys think?
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
I gotta be honest, I don't like the way most people have reacted to Chimaev winning the title. Like, prior to this DDP fight, the guy was the most electric box office fighter in the UFC and had been for years. And now, after one performance, which I would say wasn't his fault, he is now being looked at like he's the new John Fitch. This isn't. I don't know. I think you should give Chimaev a pass. I mean, the damn UFC rankings page hasn't even put his name at the top of the division yet, which is kind of brutal. But my analysis of the DDP fight, and you have to forgive me, it was like 6 a.m. and I was a few drinks deep. I think that his game plan was obviously to just move out of the way of the guard of Drickus and basically just sort of have a lot of higher body control time, which obviously would have allowed him to play off the chokes and obviously set up the crucifix position, which he used a lot of. But Du Plessis was not doing enough to try and force the get-ups. He was not doing enough to try and regain his guard, to do any sort of steps backwards to try and force the stand-up. And the sort of the passivity of him trying his best to not get finished or whatever it was his game plan was just completely the wrong approach to it. I disagree. I don't think that you need good takedown defense to beat Du Plessis. To beat Chimaev. You need good grappling on bottom to be able to negate his advances, because we all said it last week that DDP's best chance of winning the fight was for it to go late, was for it to reach rounds 3, 4, and 5 and having sapped Chimaev's gas tank. But because DDP gave no resistance and just basically lied there and tried to protect himself from the little rabbit punches, he allowed Chimaev to have a very easy go of things. And when we got to round 3, 4, and 5, we didn't see the same Chimaev we saw in round 3 against Burns or in round 3 against Usman. So you need a well-rounded fighter who is going to be able to just resist everything. You need to have an element of defensive competence everywhere, and also a ability to just make Chimaev work. And in terms of that from a grappling perspective, because as far as I'm concerned, if Chimaev wants to get you to the mat, he will. It's what happens after that. Names like Caio Bahayo do stand out because we know he's got pretty good grappling acumen. Same with Renier Derrida. But my issue with those guys is I don't necessarily know if I really favor them a whole lot in the striking against Chimaev. Obviously, Derrida and Baralho are both good fighters, especially in the striking department as well. I'm not saying they're bad, but Du Plessis had the one punch power to be able to turn the tide of the fight, and he did land one shot on Chimaev in round 5 that was if we had that in round 3, could have been a bit more interesting. But yeah, it's a real headache because you look at the top 15 of the division at middleweight, and there isn't anyone that fits the description I'm talking about. Honestly, the best chance I think that anyone has is Kamaru Usman. It's Kamaru Usman moving up to middleweight, but it's obviously never going to happen. So I'm not saying it seriously, but you need somebody who has the ability to make him work, the power on the feet, and the cardio to keep that going across 25 minutes. I don't know enough about Fluffy Hernandez on the bottom to be able to necessarily say that he could do that. But if Fluffy worked on guard retention and just keeping himself out of the sort of side control and half guard positions and retaining his guard as much as he could, I think he would give Chimaev a scary fight across 25 minutes. So there's options, but it's got to be somebody with a grappling base, because you're going to have to go through the fire to get to the other side. So, yeah, I think Chimaev deserves a bit more of our respect. The guy has been one of the most exciting dudes since he came to the UFC. And one bad performance, not even a bad performance, it was so dominant. One performance that wasn't his round one smash, like he deserves more than that. So I'm still a little bit excited for the Chimaev reign. I think it's been a long time since we've had a fighter that is just like terrifying, that is a champion and manages to hold the belt for a long time. So yeah, I think it could be good. I think we're writing him off too quickly. What about you, Don? What do you think?
I'm not writing him off at all. I think it was a fantastic performance. I mean, if you're very happy for a Chimaev bet as well, but you're not complaining about that. Taking the safe route, of course. No, he did what he needed to win. I haven't really paid attention to what people have said. I've just been sad because DDP lost and I bet on him. I think it was a brilliant performance from Chimaev. It completely nullified DDP, and he deserves to be champion. I think for me, the issue is that he's probably not going to be an active champion, and my sort of premonition for this is probably going to be retiring undefeated. I mean, maybe fight once or twice more. He's not going to be active, so that's the main issue. He's not going to be like DDP fighting 4 times in 2 years. I don't know when we're going to see him again, if at all. He may never fight again. He may actually retire. Well, that would be a hot take, wouldn't it? I predict that he's going to retire. He doesn't need the money. He was saying that many times in the lead up. He's a millionaire. He said that in the ESPN interview. So I'd be happy if he fought anyone, to be honest. And if it's Borralho or Imavov, they're going to lose 100%. This guy is elite at grappling. I definitely underestimated him. I won't do that again. I don't think Imavov or Borralho, they'll make it closer. They're going to bet than DDP, but I can't see how they can do much different. I said to Josh before he came on, it's the Khabib thing, wrestling in the mountains with bears since you were 4 years old. How do you train for that when you start wrestling at 25? Either you've been doing this for a long time or you haven't, and which is your point about Usman, which I agree with. Yeah, Usman and Gilbert Burns did so well against him because they are really, really good grapplers, and there's no one who fits that bill except Fluffy. And honestly, I think the problem with Fluffy is he's going to be vulnerable early, right? And that's when Chimaev is most dangerous. So I think Hernandez, I agree with both of you. So I think there's no one suitable. And if there is someone in the middleweight division, because let's face it, Kamaru's not going to be the one. He's a welterweight. It's going to be Hernandez. And then, yeah, I don't know if I'd bet on Hernandez in that situation. I mean, I just picked Hernandez the week before, right? So, and he destroyed Dolidze. But yeah, I think Dolidze just looked off. He just looked completely off. He wasn't at his best in the grappling department. So it's hard for me to say Hernandez would do well against Chimaev. I think Chimaev will win that fight. I mean, maybe I'm still feeling that I need longer to think about it and recover from last night, but I can't see past Chimaev. I can't see anyone beating him. But yeah, maybe I need more time to think about Hernandez because yeah, he has the gas tank on him, but I don't know if he has the grappling defense. He doesn't have the wrestling background, and I think I can see him getting controlled. And probably, Chimaev, this new version, Chimaev 2.0, that thinks things through. He might have a good game plan for Hernandez. We'll see. Right, we've got one more question here, which is a two-parter. So these are not confirmed fights, but it looks like Lerone Murphy will fight Volkanovski at the end of the year, which is fantastic. I'd much rather see that fight from Evloev. And I thought that was really clever from Volk to come out straight away and go, yep, he deserves it. Because who would you want? You want to fight Evloev in a guy who's just going to fight where he's just going to wrestle you for 5 rounds and deplete your gas tank, probably win a boring decision? Or do you want to fight the guy that you could potentially, put a schooling on, right? And we can talk about the odds as well. I have a theory that probably Murphy will be favourite in that fight. He'll probably be like minus, 120 against Volkanovski. I don't know what you guys think. And then I think the other fight is not confirmed either. I think Prates called out Leon Edwards. MVP said he'd like to fight Prates. I'd love to see Prates MVP. I don't want to see Prates Leon Edwards, mainly because I just fear for Leon Edwards' life. But I think I'll go MVP, to be honest. I think MVP, I think he can, yeah, I mean, unless Prates grapples him, right? So that's the thing. Yeah. What do you guys think about these two fights?
You want to go first, Will, or?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if I can find. I'm sure Fight Odds released some early lines on potential title fights in the future, but I can't find them off the top of my head. But yeah, I think the Prates MVP one's interesting. I think that whilst MVP is a elite striker, Prates' dangerousness could be interesting. But I think The Ian Gary fight is probably going to be where all of the devil's in the details against Prates. Those early rounds for Gary, probably in the striking department at least, are probably where MVP probably does the necessary research to find a way to just stay safe. I mean, really, you just need MVP to do what he does. It's just his insane ability to just manage distance like it's nothing. It's crazy. Yeah, I think MVP probably gets the job over Prates, but I do think that'd be quite a close fight. I'd expect it to be lying quite close. Murphy versus Volkanovski is a really interesting one, though. I'm not sure how I feel about that one. I think I am also just kind of struggling with where is Volkanovski at the moment. I mean, obviously the performance against Lopez was great, but I don't know. Again, it's the same thing. Like I said it last week, I was so non-committal in the Murphy Pico fight just because I don't know enough about Pico, and like it's the same thing here. Really, like I don't know. Like Murphy knocks out a guy who is unknown to us really and hasn't been tested and has had a history of being finished. Like Lerone Murphy's great, but I don't necessarily know if we learned anything there. Is maybe I'm being really skeptical and like really really harsh on Lerone Murphy, but I wouldn't have said he was good enough to beat Volkanovski 3 days ago. And now that he's beaten Aaron Pico, does that change my mind? No, not really. I think there's a lot of people who, if given the sequence that Lerone Murphy got to punch Pico and to elbow Pico as he did, I think a lot of people could have done, had that moment to finish him because, yeah, I mean, Pico was marching forward, was really kind of defensively vulnerable. And I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that when all is said and done, when we look back on this conversation in a couple of years' time, I don't think that Aaron Pico is going to be a signature win on Lerone Murphy's career. So I guess I'd have to back the elite career and skill set of Volkanovski there. How about you guys?
Yeah, when it comes to Murphy or Volk, I have to just go off what I saw with Volk when he fought Lopez. Like, whenever Lopez was landing, Volk looked visibly stunned or hurt, and I don't think that's a good indication of where Volk is at. I mean, I feel like Volk is obviously clinging onto the title, but he's not really a dominant champ just yet. Like he used to be, but nowadays it's a bit murky, right? Murphy obviously is coming off a win against Pico, and early on in that fight, Pico was landing heavy lefts all the time. Like there was really no way that I could see Murphy pulling off that spinning elbow until he did. And so I feel like when it comes to Murphy or Volk, you can't doubt Volk here because he has obviously fought the who's who of the division, but also the more that we wait for this fight to happen, if it happens, the more in question comes his age. And obviously he's not a prime fighter anymore. Like he's not young. He's not the same fighter that fought Holloway those 3 times, like his ability to fight the younger generation it's slipping, I reckon. I reckon there will be a title change eventually, but will that be Murphy? I don't know. But I do think that the odds are going to be pretty close. Murphy, as I believe Dom said or Will said, will be a -120 favorite, which makes sense to me. And I'm not one to line fights, but that if I were to visualize it, it makes sense. As for Practice or MVP, it's so hard to pick against MVP because it's not his power or whatever that makes him a hard fighter. It's his style. It's so hard to prepare for. And as Joe Rogan has said during the commentary, it's a point fighter. You can't really prepare for it easily. It's so hard to read how a point fighter is going to strike or what they're going to do next. And Pratis, he seems a bit too orthodox to kind of pair up well against MVP, right? Like, no matter what way I visualize it right now, I can only imagine similarities to how MVP dealt with Shara, right? Like Practice would march forward, but then MVP would just blast practice in the face. Like that's how most MVP fights go. So I might go with MVP there. Like the odds might be in MVP's favor, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's just a weird fight to think about, really.
Yeah, when I said that Volk was Murphy was minus 120, I was just making it up. I just say it's good that you think similar, because that was my sort of guess line, was that Murphy was minus 120. I think differently on the Prates MVP fight. I'm pretty confident Prates will be a favorite in Brazil, and because of the age disparity as well, I think MVP will be an underdog. So let's hope you keep that thought in mind, because how you're thinking right now, because when that fight comes around, see if you feel differently. If he's, I think he could be like a minus 150, minus 200 favorite, because don't forget he's just got the spinning back fist knockout, which I think is why, again, I think that recency bias will affect the Murphy line as well. I do think Murphy has a good chance to beat Volkanovski, but yeah, I do think I think I favor MVP, and I think it's a sort of very close fight between Murphy and Volk. I wouldn't be able to like necessarily hang my hat on anything. I think it could easily be a 5-round fight, though. Like could be an over there. Okay, that brings us to the end of the episode. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a breakdown of UFC Paris.